Hello and welcome to Insight. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Ashwin Sanghi. Mr. Sanghi is somebody that I have the privilege of calling a friend, but more importantly, he is India's top best-selling author of English fiction literature. Mr. Sanghi has this unique ability to combine fiction, mythology, as well as history to create some of India's most successful books. Come join us today as we discuss Mr. Sanghi's writing, his books, his research, as well as his opinions on some of the most critical events in recent modern history. Ashwin, welcome to Insight. I can't tell you how happy I am to finally have you on my show. I was just really lucky that you were traveling here from Bombay.
No, I'm delighted to be here, Rami. And even if I wasn't traveling into Delhi, I would have somehow or the other made this interview possible. But thank you for having me.
Not at all. Ashwin, let me get right down to it. I know, including my own researchers who are big fans of yours, you are by far one of the best-selling authors that India has. And you have this unique ability to be able to put together facts and fiction and create these wonderful books. Tell me, how do you do that? Is there a method to this? And what drives you to, make books like these?
So, for me, the driving question really is what if? It's a very delicious question. What if what we consider to simply be an epic, what if it's not myth? What if it's actually itihas? And what if there are remnants which can indicate a great war that happened thousands of years ago? Or what if what we know as Jesus Christ was actually someone who took all his wisdom from this land that we call India? So that what if question is what really inspires me. Now, as a fiction writer, I know that at the end of the day, what we do is we spin yarns. So, when I had just written the Rosabal line way back in 2008, a press reporter asked me, he said, "You're an MBA in finance, have with a background in business. One day you decide you'll write a theological thriller. What's wrong with you? I mean, what are your qualifications?" And I said, growing up years, my mom always used to say that I was a bloody good liar. So I could tell a lie with a straight face. And as a fiction writer, that's what we do. We spin yarns. But the corollary to that, Rami, is that if you are going to tell a lie, then tell the lie close to the truth, because then it becomes that much more believable. So what I try and do is the way at least I visualize my process is that I do a lot of research for the subject that I'm going to be writing about. And if I look at it in the context of building a house or a building, I create a foundation which is based on fact and history and geography and science and anthropology and many, many other disciplines. I find the tantalizing overlap areas that could fulfill my desire of being a conspiracy fiction buff. And you could say the columns and the beams are factual. Wherever I can actually incorporate fact, I try and do that within the structural framework. But then I still have huge gaps between those columns and beams. That's where I put in the brick and plaster, and that's the fiction.
That's the fiction. So, you said, a lot of this sometimes you think can be itihas, and that's one of the, I think, one of the debates that now you see, as to why we call our own history mythology.
Absolutely.
But having said that, now archaeology is taking new steps, and we've seen Rakhi Gadi come up, and we've seen so many sites like this. Does your research ever involve traveling to these places? Does it involve, you to maybe meet experts, or is it more from literature?
No, it depends on the nature of the book. For example, if I look at a book like, let's say, Chanakya's Chant, there was very little travel that happened for that book, because what it started out with was a reading of the Arthashastra, And once I had read the Arthashastra, I realized I needed to read it a second time to fully absorb it. And then I also realized that no, I needed to fill in the gaps with the Niti Shastra, and then that led me actually to the Mudra Rakshas, because I realized that there was a lot of stuff written by Chanakya, but there wasn't that much written about him. So even though I knew that I was reading a work that had been penned as a play for performing by Vishakhadatta almost 700 years later, I still went back to it in order to try and create the context of a lifetime for Chanakya. But if I look at a book like, let's say, the Krishna Key, it wasn't simply looking at the Bhagavad Puran. It was also about going to places like Bet Dwarka, Dwarka,
Oh,
Mathura,
wonderful.
Vrindavan, and so on and so forth. If I look at a book like the Sialkot Saga, which is two lifetimes of two people who live in post 1947 India up to the present day, it was actually talking to people who have lived through those times, because you want to try and create the atmosphere of that period. Or, for example, when I wrote Keepers of the Kal Chakra, it was 6 months of sitting with a friend who was an IIT engineer to understand quantum theory, because I'm not a science student. So, how do I try and pinpoint the overlaps between quantum theory and Vedanta as a complete novice? Uh, the vault of Vishnu required a couple of trips into China to be able to really see where the overlaps are, and to understand how someone like a Bodhidharma continues to be revered in Shaolin. So I think it's a mixture of reading a lot, talking to people. The Rosabal line was mostly talking to a lot of scholars and researchers who had studied that tomb and could actually fill in the gaps and talk to me about the lost years of Christ and how that fits in with the tomb. So, talking to people, traveling, reading, it's a combination of a lot of stuff.
I can imagine, but that's exactly what makes you a best-selling author, because that's a lot of effort and a lot of dynamics to bring into writing
But
a
it's
book.
joy, it's pure, unadulterated joy.
That's why I'm going to ask you, like the earlier, journalist you mentioned asked you, you're talking about so many, Rosabal Line, Krishna's Key, and like you said, Arthashastra, you have to read it twice. These are not easy.
These are not easy reads at all.
These are not easy reads, and you need to keep, every time you read it, you probably find something new in it.
Yeah, of course.
But these also delve with religious mysteries, a lot of
Yes.
your books. And I'm a student of theology, and, for me, obviously, this is very exciting. But you're a student of finance. Like,
Yeah,
how did this
absolutely.
interest come?
Absolutely. So I think what happened is that during my growing up years, I grew up in a typical, my mother is a Bania, my father is a Marwadi. And so it was taken for granted कि ये तो गद्दी पे बैठेगा, काम करेगा, that is what
course.
is expected. My father introduced me to the work ethic probably when I was 13 or 14. I used to go into his daftar, and there was a Munim ji who used to wear a kala topi and he used to wear a dhoti, and he would say that, look, there are 6 lakh words in the dictionary, they are all irrelevant. The only word you need to know is debit and credit. अगर ये समझ में आ गया, then everything else is taken care of. And when I was writing the Vault of Vishnu, I'm sorry, I'm going to digress a little bit.
Digress away.
When I was writing the Vault of Vishnu, I came across a very interesting anecdote of the merchants of Samarkand. And the merchants of Samarkand had this wonderful tradition that when a child was born in the house, when a son was born, they would touch a drop of honey to the tongue of the child and a drop of glue to the palm of the child. The idea being that he grows up to have a very sweet tongue, so that
And
he
money.
can sell anything and money sticks to his palm. So that was the cultural ethos in an Indian context that I grew up in. That, this is what is expected of you. But I think complementary to that was my maternal granduncle who lived in Kanpur. And he was not only a great businessman, but he was also a scholar and poet of sorts. And he used to send me one book every week, and would expect not only that I read the book, but eventually send him a letter telling him what I've read and why I liked
How
it or
wonderful.
didn't like it, or almost like a preliminary book review of sorts.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this started when I was probably 12 or 13. During his lifetime, he sent me a little over 300 books. Now that is, I think, sorely missing in today's generation. I, as a parent, have not succeeded in doing that with my own son. But that was a different time. And if you ask me, that was my education. So when I used to go to work, Munimji would be saying debit credit. When I sat with my granduncle, he would say that beta देखो, तुम तो बनिया परिवार के हो, तो तुम पूजा तो लक्ष्मी जी की करोगे. But remember one thing, that Lakshmi ji is always curious, where is Saraswati? So if Saraswati is in this room, Lakshmi wants to be in this room. If Saraswati gets up and leaves, then Lakshmi also gets up and leaves in order to find out where she's gone. So he said, even if your objective in life is Lakshmi, go after Saraswati, because Lakshmi will automatically come there. And he said, in our Sanatan Dharma, the only deity that can sit between Lakshmi and Saraswati is Ganesh, which probably explains why I look the way I do.
That's very sweet.
But
Analogy is very-
but it was a quest. It was a quest to try and somehow or the other balance the two. And had it not been for Nanaji, I probably would not have gone down the path that I took much later in life. I only started writing in my 30s.
Oh, so that leaves us with a lot of hope ourselves. But having said that, you come from a very talented family, clearly. You guys have been great at finance. Like you said, your uncle was a great businessman, yet he had so much of respect for books. And that seems to have trickled down to you. But is there also, in addition to that, and this is, for everybody who'll watch, wanting to be inspired by the amount of books that you've written in such record times, that is there a routine that you follow? Is there a writing routine? Is there a researching routine? Is there something special that you do?
Frankly, the way it works for me is that any book in my Bharat series, there have been 7 books in the Bharat series. There have been other books outside of the Bharat series. I wrote 2 crime thrillers with James Patterson. I've just recently published another crime thriller. I've written about 5 or 6 self-help books, which are known as the 13-step series. But what I'm really known for is my Bharat series. And that typically, each of the titles takes me about 2 years. And it always starts with the process of ideation. A lot of people think that when you're actually sitting down to write a novel, that's the time you come out with an idea. It doesn't work like that. So I'm capturing ideas all of the time. For example, if I have this conversation with you and the conversation we had before this interview, probably there are 1 or 2 things that you may have said which appeal to me. So what we don't do is we don't capture those, which I do. So over the years, I've emailed myself about 10,000 times with thoughts that came to me, or something that I saw, or something that someone said, or a page from a book, or a web link, or what have you. So when I'm looking to write a book, that's the time I go back into my idea bank and see, okay, now which of these could be the next novel. Once I've zeroed in on the idea, that's the time when I start looking at, okay, what sort of research do I need to do in order to be able to tackle this topic? And will it involve reading? If so, what do I need to read? In the event that it involves travel, where do I need to go? If it involves interviews, developing a list of who all I need to talk to. And then I would spend anywhere between probably 10 or 12 months in terms of just building up that research. Once I'm done with that, then I spend the next 3 months on what is called plotting. So I will have every chapter identified and what happens within the chapter. And as they say, easy reading is damn hard writing. So if you're trying, it's very different when you're writing something which is academic or scholarly, because then you're not trying to necessarily hold someone's interest or attention. You're simply trying to present information. This is mass market fiction. So it's very, very challenging, because a person should not have to turn the page. The page should turn itself. That's very, very challenging. So I will typically plot everything in advance. My plot outlines are very, very detailed. So if you take a book like the Sialkot Saga, Uh, my plot outline is an Excel spreadsheet, and it starts from 1947 and goes all the way down to 2010. And in each year, what were the ages of my two protagonists? What would they have been doing in their respective lives? What was happening politically, socially, culturally in India at that time? And where do I leave you at the end of that chapter so that you're forced to turn the page? So once I'm done with that plot outline, that's when I start writing the very first word. People say that they have writer's block. I never experienced writer's block because during those 6 months, I'm simply like a child with the coloring book. The outlines are already drawn. I'm only taking last minute decisions about whether it should be red or green within that space. Uh, and once I'm done with the writing, typically 3 months will go in editing, rewriting, polishing, and so on and so forth. So it's a very structured and systematic process. Typically, I work between 5 and 9 in the morning. I'm up in the morning at 5. My writing is done by 9 o'clock. So people have a 9 to 5 day. I have a 5 to 9 day. And most of my evening hours are devoted to reading and researching. Sometimes it may be related to a book that I'm writing at that time, or it could be related to something that I want to do in the future. And the middle of the day is not about books, it's about the business of books. Because at the end of the day, there is also that old Banya tendency of mine, which is that, okay, if you've spent 2 years writing a book, make sure that it sells.
Correct. And I think that's what every author would want for their book to do well.
Yeah.
But I think what I take away from what you've just said is the amount of back end work that goes in. So it's not as, somebody who's not a writer would think that, you just get inspired and you
Well,
write.
there are parts of fiction which are like that. For example, literary fiction is all about the emotion. It's about setting the scene. It's about having a blank page, a blank piece of paper in front of you and seeing where the emotions go. Uh, I would say that that is probably an art form, but what I do is not an art; it's a craft. So I think probably a carpenter who makes a chair, probably his first chair won't be as good as his 100th, and his 100th might not be as good as the 1000th. So I'm trying to hone that craft, and I genuinely always think of myself as work in progress. All that I want to do is be 2 or 3% better with every book.
Oh, that's so nice. But you also mentioned what you're the most known for is the Bharat series.
Yes.
You clearly prefer using the word Bharat to India.
Yes.
Why so?
Because people think of Bharat as a geographical entity, and I don't. For me, Bharat represents almost an ancient Vedic arc of sorts, an expanse of ideas, of literature, of science, of innovation, of religion, um, culture, dance forms, what have you. And to a very great extent, we have somewhere in the last 70 years, we've not been able to delve into this and bring this to the fore. So we simply think of Bharat as another name for India. And thankfully for guys like Desai, Deepak, they've brought Bharat back, into modern day terminology. But otherwise, to my mind, I mean, I find it fascinating that you have a country like Iran, which gets its name from Aryanem Vaija, which is the land of the Aryans, right? So it just tells you, or you go back to 1380 BC and you have two warring tribes, the Hittites and the Mitanni, signing a peace treaty and invoking Vedic gods, whether it is Varuna and Mitra and Indra. And then you, of course, have the Romans adopting Mitra, and where Mitra goes, obviously Varun is bound to be there. So you have the Greeks adopting Varun as Uranus, and then you travel from there, and you start traveling towards India, and you have an area where we now have, of course, a war infested country like Afghanistan, where we have a region called Gandhar, which is now Kandahar or Hindu Kush. And then you go to China and you suddenly realize that, my God, if it hadn't been for two Indian monks, Buddhism would never have traveled there. Or Bodhidharma, if he had not gone, then the elements of Zen meditation or Silambam or Kalari Payattu would not have eventually transformed into Kung Fu. Then you further travel south and you realize that, my God, the largest Vishnu temple in the world is in
Angkor
Cambodia,
Wat, yes.
right? And then you look at the number of versions of the Ramayana
Incredible.
that have been penned in Southeast Asia.
I think you mentioned somewhere 300?
300 versions, of which a large number of those are in Southeast Asia. So, I mean, for example, in Malaysia, you have the Hikayat Seri Rama. In Indonesia, you have the puppet dance, which is performed based on the Ramayana. And then why only there? Now, for example, all the connections between ancient Ayodhya and Korea are now coming to the fore.
You know, I just went to Japan, sorry to cut you, but it was incredible to see Saraswati being worshipped.
Oh yes, of course. They have the seven
Ganesh,
gods of
yes.
seven
In the Shinto,
gods of fortune. The
yeah.
seven gods of fortune.
In the pantheon of the
Yes.
Shinto gods, the shrine.
That's right.
You have. I went to the Toji temple in Kyoto, where Buddha is protected by the Trinity, the
Yes.
Vishnu,
Yes.
Maheshwara, and Brahma. It's incredible.
So in I think, if I'm not mistaken, within the seven gods of fortune, they have Lakshmi and Saraswati, and they have Kuber, they have Shiv. And of course, they also have their own version of Garud, which is called Karura.
Yes, yes.
So
Very similar.
Very, very similar. So, I mean, this is the sort of expanse on which we had a footprint. And a lot of this is either discarded or discounted. And I think this is the great advantage of being a fiction writer, that we don't necessarily fear treading in areas where scholars tend to sort of establish boundaries for themselves. So I'm quite happy penning a book like the Krishna Key and saying that, you know what, based on what Professor Narhari Achar said, in my opinion, probably the Mahabharat war happened in 3067 BC. Scholars have a problem with that, whereas we as fiction writers don't have an issue with that. You know, so I think in that sense we are able to go where scholars cannot, and hopefully we illuminate the way for eventually scholars to go there.
Correct. But you mentioned this entire, sort of connectivity that we have, this broad landscape. One of the interesting things is also the idea of the Trinity,
Of course.
and you see that recurring throughout.
Of course.
So, would you say that it's, all connected, or these are just independent iconography that has some amount of connectivity with each other?
No, there is some amount of connectivity, but one can't necessarily assume that each and every connection, there's the old mathematical saying, no, that correlation doesn't mean causation. So, but yes, there are aspects which have stunned me while I've been writing my books. So, for example, you brought up the issue of the Trinity. Now, for example, to my mind, if you take, let's say, the two major Hindu trinities, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, and Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kali. Now, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh is usually always represented as an upward pointing triangle. Almost you could say phallic in symbolism. And on the other hand, you have Lakshmi, Saraswati, Kali usually being represented as a downward pointing triangle, almost womb-like. So, masculine and feminine. But now what happens when I overlap two equilateral triangles? I end up getting a 6-pointed star. And that 6-pointed star becomes very, very important once you start looking at the Abrahamic end of things. Now, on its own, I would not have read too much into it, Rami. But then when I was going further, I realized that you have what you consider to be the Lord of creation, Brahma. And then the genesis or the origination point for the Judaic culture is someone known as Abraham. So, what happens when I take Abraham and put the A from the beginning at the end? I get Brahma. Now, at that point of time, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a historian, I'm not a theologian. So, I'm wondering that, listen, am I reading too much into it? So then I go further, dig deeper, and I realize Brahma's consort is Saraswati and Abraham's wife is Sarah. Sarah Saraswati. Now, am I reading further too much into it? So, there are many things which I can't explain, uh, but they are interesting, tantalizing nuggets from the angle of a fiction writer. Uh, and yes, I do find it very surprising that eventually the Christians decide to adopt a Trinity, which is the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. The Zoroastrians talk about good words, good thoughts, good deeds. So everyone seems to be talking in Trinities. So there must be some reason for that.
Quite right.
Not yet figured it out.
Let me ask you, you also spoke about, I've read one of your articles, and you write some brilliant articles, as well as you write books. Your articles are very sort of on the point, and you draw this reference to something that Samir Jain in the Times of India Conclave said about the Maha Akhand Bharat.
Yes.
And you wrote an article on that.
Yes.
Could you give me your point of view on that as to what you mean by it?
Well, one part of it is, of course, the fact that I think India in ancient times had a footprint which was a global footprint.
Would it be what we have just spoken about?
It is precisely what we have just spoken about, and maybe even wider. Maybe even wider. It's not a surprise that pre Mughal, you were looking at about roughly 25% of world GDP. So, in other words, you had military might as well as soft power. And it was, I think, Joseph Nye who said that at the end of the day, soft power and hard power go together. So, today, when we are now seeing the rise of Bharat once again, then this is the time when we need to start leveraging that soft power even more. And I know traditionally we've always thought of this as Bollywood.
That's the only
Let's
soft
not
power.
Yes, I think it's way beyond that. It's about the number of Indians who are living abroad. It is about things like yoga, meditation, Indian cuisine. I will even count chicken tikka masala in our soft power. I mean, it's a range of things, and ultimately it is. So if it's I mean, the way at least I see it is that yes, there cannot be a compromise on economic power and military power. But if you really want to punch above your weight, then probably it is that soft power element that we need to leverage. And that was the context in which I was talking about Mahakhand Bharat. I was not talking in the context of Veer Savarkar.
Yeah, a geographical
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
outline. No, but you're absolutely right, which reminds me of something that Prime Minister Modi said. He said, India is like Krishna. He has the Sudarshan Chakra, which is his hard power, and the
Yes.
flute, which is his soft power.
Absolutely.
And that is the road that we are taking today. And like you said, it's not limited to Bollywood,
Yeah.
Our culture through our diaspora carries our soft power. I went to Japan and found out that the curry that they have, like, we have the katsu curry, it came from India.
Wow.
It was a Bengali gentleman who brought it there, was married to a woman who had a bakery and stuffed the curry flavor into the
Amazing.
barn. So,
Amazing.
India, I feel, is so culturally rich that, it's almost you don't need to plan out, a cultural influence, they take it with them wherever they go. Which brings me to my next question about, you write about all of this, you write about history, and you bring in mythology, and you bring in all these things which were very, very unfashionable. Ashwin, when I was growing up, 20, 30 years ago, there wasn't this sort of reclamation of your own civilization. And we see a revival of that today, wherein we speak of our soft power like you just did with so much of pride, and something that, is so useful in the modern day, not just as a diplomatic tool, but also, as something that puts India on the map. How do you think this has happened?
I think it was waiting to happen. It's happened, yes, but it was waiting to happen for a very, very long time, because uh, I think when you consciously downplay something over decades, then when it does bounce back, it tends to bounce back rather aggressively. Uh, I think we have downplayed our Sanatani roots. We have downplayed the Hindu influence for many, many years because of this entire bogey of secularism. And please don't get me wrong, I use the word very, very advisedly, that this country has always been plural, but I don't believe this country has ever been secular. In 1947, when the constitution was drafted, the word secular was not there in the preamble. It was added by a lame duck parliament 1975 or 76. Why did the framers of our constitution not use that word? Because they realized that how could you codify Hindu personal law if you were truly secular? How could you pass the Religious and Charitable Endowments Act and take over the revenues of thousands of temples if you were truly secular? How could you have a Hajj committee and a Waqf board if you were truly secular? So, in our country, we were never secular, we were plural. And that comes to us from the Hindu ethos, that Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that the world is a family. So, in that sense, they realized that that plurality is ingrained within us. And in our country, we've always prided ourselves on this Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb. But this Ganga Jamuna is only local to India. It's not there in Pakistan. It's not there in Bangladesh. So there is something to be said, that what is that one factor which is there in India which is not there elsewhere? It's Sanatan majority. So, in that sense, I believe that by downplaying that, we have done a great disservice to our country. That we need to be talking about now. I'm again very, very conscious of the fact that there tends to be a tendency to glorify more than what is necessary, and we must be very, very cautious and careful on that front. So, I mean, just simply because you have a Pushpak Viman in the Ramayana, I don't want to challenge the Wright brothers. So, but that doesn't take away from the fact that there are verses that are explained within the Rig Veda that talk about the speed of light. So, when we glorify everything, we are doing a great disservice to ourselves, because then that means that there will be a tendency to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And that is where I believe that we should very, very consciously talk about the stuff that was true achievement of our culture, of our civilization. And over a period of time, Rami, what I'm really hoping for is that irrespective of religion, irrespective of caste, irrespective of language or gender or orientation or what have you, I hope that all of us can be proud of the fact that we are products of this culture. And I think that is unfortunately nowadays become a political term, whereas to my mind, it doesn't matter if you're Hindu or Muslim or Christian, you can still say that I'm a Sanatani, because
Correct.
this is the land I was born in.
Correct. So then let me ask you, we saw one of the most important moments in Indian history last month, with the Pran Pratishthan at the Ram
Yes.
Mandir. And now there are talks of, Mathura and, so on and so forth. So how would you view this?
To my mind, I think what right now India lacks is an enlightened Muslim leadership. And I used to say this even during the time of the Babri Masjid Janmabhoomi dispute. I used to say that I wish that this was not being settled through a court order and was being settled as a result of the two communities coming together. Because at the end of the day, that, if you go by Sitaram Goel, 3,000 temples were probably demolished. He in fact goes on to say that it could be 10 times the number, which is what leads you to that 30,000 figure. Now the problem is that it's like what Mohan Bhagwat ji said that, are you going to start searching for a shivling under every structure, under every masjid? It's going to rip apart the country. So I wish that an enlightened leadership at the other end had taken a call that, look, there are 3 places or 5 places. It's like, in some ways, Krishna going to the Kauravas and saying, listen, हमको वो 5 गांव दे दो, and ये पूरी जो जिसे कहते हैं महाभारत, ये टल जाएगी. I wish that that sort of a thinking and sensible approach were to happen, where certain key places which are of sentimental value to the Hindus would simply be given by the other side, and of course compensated for generously, whether it is in terms of land or building and so on and so forth. But I think that that would actually bring the communities closer and would prevent the digging up of shivlings under every masjid, because that I don't think can be, if we are really looking for military progress, economic progress, soft power progress, how can a nation that is at war with itself do all of that?
I couldn't have said it better. That's the rational way of looking at things. But more often than not, we also find propaganda takes over a lot of these narratives. Again, one of the pieces that I read of yours spoke about, I think it was one of the ads. Yeah. And I think we just, before this interview, we were talking about it, about the holy ad, know. And while we're talking about, being rational with our civilizational claims and our reclamation, of temples, we also side by side see this sort of instigatory sort of material that's coming out in the media. Why did you write that article?
It was almost like a reaction to this, on social media, I always wonder that, how often have you ever had Raksha Bandhan where someone tied a leather rakhi on your wrist?
Never.
Right? We just don't do it. If at all it happens, it would probably be not even 1%. Yeah. But yet there are people who feel the necessity of talking about animal rights when it comes down to Raksha Bandhan. But they don't feel the necessity of talking about animal rights when it comes to Bakri Eid. And here I'm not being, I'm being very, very upfront that, listen, either one needs to be able to have an opinion and a view on everything that is good or bad, but you don't do selectivity. And so my article was not a reaction to any one particular ad that came out. It was a reaction to selectivity. And this is what we have done all along in this country. And I think there is a fatigue showing up now. And I think a lot of the sort of articles that I wrote were a reaction to that fatigue.
And I think that was very representative of what generally now, even on social media, what people are feeling. There was a reaction to, these sort of ill-timed and, like you said, preachy.
Absolutely preachy. If you say that you have a problem with firecrackers during Diwali, then you also have to have a problem with crop burning in the outskirts of Delhi. You also have to have a problem with the massive New Year celebrations that happen on Sydney Harbour. And you also then need to have a problem in terms of the number of landfills that are consumed by Christmas trees, which are discarded after Christmas. So, then I have no problem in case you have a problem with all of that.
Absolutely, but you can't have this piecemeal
cherry picking is where the problem is.
Yeah, I haven't, unfortunately, I'm very fond of firecrackers, and I haven't burnt any for the last couple of years because it's banned in Delhi. Except we have like one of those wedding areas close to my house. There has been firecrackers every single day because it's the wedding season, So nobody seems to have a problem with breathing right now, except during the Holi. Well, Ashwin, it's been great talking to you. So I'll come to my last question because unfortunately we're running out of time. You have all these great books. What would you say you'd really want your audience to get out of it?
I don't know if this is a pattern which my readers have observed or not, but one of the elements in all of my books is the dominance of the female narrative. So in fact, typically the protagonists tend to be women. And I have grown up in an environment where I always believed that the actual source of energy, and in fact, I put that in the acknowledgements. The very last line of my acknowledgements is always that I bow my head to Ma Shakti, who puts every word on the page for me. Uh, and in some ways, I have genuinely found that if you look at ancient civilizations also, till the advent of Christianity and Islam, we always gave tremendous importance to Shakti and the female energy form, as it were. Um, and my way of thinking of it is really that, we like to think of the world in terms of opposites. There is light and there's darkness, and there is hot and there's cold. But the truth of the matter is, Rami, that actually you have what is darkness? It's the absence of light. What is cold? The absence of heat. In that sense, in my own mind, I see Shiva as the absence of Shakti. There isn't a duality there. There is Shakti, and then there is the lack of Shakti. And that is a central theme that I have tried to bring across in virtually every book in the Bharat series, because I believe that we are living in times where that needs to happen. I think a greater appreciation of where we have come from. They say, that you can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. I think we need to bring that back into public discourse.
Well, what a wonderful note to end this conversation on, but only till the next time I have the opportunity to have you back on this show.
Thank you, Rami. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
No.
Really enjoyed having this conversation with you.
Ashwin, thank you so much for being here. Until next time.
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Ashwin Sanghi, India's best-selling author. Clearly from this discussion, what is clear is that it takes a lot of effort to create the kind of bestsellers that Ashwin Sanghi has created. It requires research, planning, and a huge investment of time. But what we've also learned from this discussion is that there is a huge market that is interested in reading books that talk about India's civilizational history, of our folklores, of our mythology. Times are turning, and Ashwin Sanghi's books is a testimony to that. Thank you. Till next time.